This is CORDIScovery. Hello and welcome to this episode of CORDIScovery with me, Abigail Acton. About 500,000 babies are born early in Europe every year. 1 in 10 births globally is premature. Being born before the 37th week can impact lungs, cause blindness, and interrupt the brain's development. For some, the condition is fatal. The World Health Organization recently reported there are approximately 6,400 newborn deaths every day, amounting to nearly 47% of all child deaths under 5. The EU has been funding research to find ways of mitigating the impact of premature birth and, where possible, averting it. Today we'll be hearing from 3 researchers who've developed new approaches to helping preterm infants and their parents. Audrey van der Meer is co-director of the Developmental Neuroscience Laboratory and professor of neuropsychology at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim. She is particularly interested in the infant brain with its enormous plasticity and capacity to learn from day one. Hello, Audrey.
Hi there, Abigail.
Isabel Hoffmann is a deep tech entrepreneur. By harnessing technology and connectivity, she is working to help create a world in which food contributes to health, not to societal diseases. Her company, Tellspec, is developing innovative ways of personalising nutrition to help premature babies thrive. Hi, Isabel.
Hi, Abigail. Thank you.
Julian Penders is co-founder of Bloom Life, a company designing wearable technologies and predictive analytics to promote prenatal health. Bloom Life's device is paired with data analytics to increase access to care, provide personalised feedback to mothers, and help doctors predict and manage pregnancy complications. Hi, Julian.
Hey, Abigail. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Audrey, I'm going to turn to you first. The AIM Coach project developed elegant experiments to analyse the brain signals of newborns and young children in order to better understand normal and abnormal brain development in full-term and premature infants. What can happen to a child's brain if it is born prematurely, Audrey?
Well, a premature birth, that will say before week 37, negatively affects the brain's folding and myelinization processes. So there's a lot of folding happening in the brain during the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, which is exactly the time when preterm babies are being born. And this process seems to be affected by the premature birth. So the folding is not as widespread as it is in babies that are allowed to go to term.
And Audrey, what is myelination?
Myelination is about the formation of the fatty myelin sheath around the brain cells. And poor myelination slows down the information processing in the brain, and fewer brain folds, they give reduced cortical area and volume.
Right. And I believe there's something about the role of the dorsal stream. Can you explain what the dorsal stream is and how that's impacted?
Yes, in the human brain, there are 2 visual processing streams called the dorsal stream and the ventral stream. The ventral stream goes from the back of the head to the temporal areas around the ears, and that is mostly involved in object recognition and color perception. But the important thing about the ventral stream is that it develops mainly after birth. So preterm birth doesn't affect the development of the ventral stream, whereas the dorsal stream, that starts in the visual cortex at the back of the head and goes all the way up to the motor cortex at the top of the head, the dorsal stream develops again mostly during the last trimester of pregnancy. And the dorsal stream is affected in a negative way by the preterm birth. Again, it seems as if the development of the dorsal stream is disrupted in some way or another. We don't know exactly what is happening, but it's caused by the baby being born too early.
Okay, and what does this actually mean in terms of the child's development? I mean, how does it manifest itself after birth?
Well, there are some typical dorsal stream functions, and those include sensory motor integration, the planning of action, timing, prospective control, the ability to know what is going to happen in the near future, and the perception of distance, speed, direction, and time to collision. So babies who are born prematurely, they often, not all of them, but some babies, they develop a dorsal stream vulnerability, which means that they have difficulty when interacting with moving objects in the world around them.
Okay, and so how did your project assess what was actually going on in the infants' brains, and what did you find? What did you set out to do, and how did you do it? It must have been a challenge.
Well, yes, over the years we have tested almost 500 babies in the first year of life, and we use our EEG hair nets. Those are 128 electrodes sewn together in the form of a hairnet that you place on the baby's head. And since the infant skull is much thinner than the adult skull, and also babies typically don't have much hair, so we record from the scalp electrical brain activity. So EEG is not sending anything into the baby's brain. It's just picking up electrical brain activity that is there always when you're alive, basically.
And how successful were the computers at picking up this brain activity? Did you manage to get information from every child upon whom you put the hairnet with the sensors, or was it very difficult to achieve?
Well, what we do is we put the babies wearing the hairnet in a baby seat in front of a large screen, and we project looming balls that start small and that approach on a collision course and explode, so to speak, in the baby's face. And then the baby has to respond, because these looming balls, they come under different speeds. So the baby has to predict when the ball is going to hit its face. And it does that by blinking or putting up its hands or ducking. But in addition, we also record a looming related brain response, which occurs in the back of the brain, in the visual cortex, that can be analyzed. So then we used AI and machine learning to teach the computer to pick out these particular looming related brain responses. And we tested 50 young babies before they started crawling, and 50 older babies after they had started crawling, different babies. And we taught the computer to pick out these brain waves automatically. And we had a 77% success rate, which is amazing, given that this is baby brain data. Yeah.
Fantastic. So you mean 77% of the time the computer was correctly able to interpret what was going on within the child's brain?
Exactly. Yes.
Fantastic. And these babies that you were looking at, were they all premature? I think you had some controls, some children that weren't born prematurely and children that were born.
Yeah, initially we used only full-term babies, and we are going to apply the algorithms to preterm babies.
Excellent. So that you're hoping to see then, I guess, what the impact actually of the premature birth was on the way that the brain then functions with regards to these stimuli, the sort of big bouncing balls coming towards them on a computer screen. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. This is something I've just literally thought of. Are all the balls the same color? I mean, have you weeded out the possibility that bright red balls and bright green balls might elicit a different response from the babies?
No, we have a ball consisted of different colors.
Oh, like a beach ball?
Yes, exactly. And it's rotating towards them.
Okay, I see. Okay, super. What's the point of this, Audrey? Tell me, how can your findings actually be used to help children that are showing a different rate of development?
Well, the idea is that if a particular baby's brain responses are flawed, that we then introduce online, while the baby is sitting in the chair and watching these balls, we introduce a tailor-made feedback loop, which means that we can, for instance, if a particular baby has difficulty with interpreting the fast speed looms approaching, then we can slow down the loom, or we can add a sound which looms in a similar way as the visual ball looming towards the child, so to make the information more rich, so that we can basically or ultimately facilitate perceptual learning in at-risk babies.
So basically you're going to be enabling the child to recognize something which it can't recognize because of the impact of being born prematurely in other ways, in order to what? Stimulate the part of the brain that needs to be developed because it's been impacted?
Yeah, so that they can process the looms more precisely, and that will help them in their daily lives as well.
Because it will build the brain up and increase the communication in the brain in that part.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes, visual motion perception is a very important way of using our brains, because it you need to be able to tell speeds, distances, when things are going to collide with you and when you are going to collide with other moving things. So it's very important, and that seems to be this dorsal stream vulnerability seems to happen a lot with babies who are born very preterm.
Okay, and how are you hoping that this will be used? Are you hoping that medical professionals will be able to use this for children that are neurologically at risk?
Yes, we hope that it allows medical professionals to provide at-risk babies with an earlier diagnosis. And then, of course, if you are able to make an earlier diagnosis in the first year, let's say, then you also need to start working on intervention programs to help the baby to develop these dorsal stream functions better.
That's fantastic. Very, very interesting research. Thank you so much, Audrey, for telling us about that. Does anyone have any questions or observations? Yes, Isabel, please.
Yes, Audrey. I'm curious about how old these infants are.
Well, we tested them in two groups, young babies before they started crawling, and older babies around 10 to 12 months after they started crawling around, because we know that the onset of self-produced locomotion gives a boost to both the perceptual systems and also to the brain.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I guess they're having to work out their place in the world themselves, and so it's already starting to exercise that part of the brain. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much. Good question. Isabel, I'm going to turn to you, actually, now. It's your turn in the hotspot. The PREMI project addressed a key problem in caring for premature infants, which is meeting their individual nutritional needs precisely and quickly to give them the very, very best start. Can you tell us a little bit about what the milk given to premature infants needs to contain, please?
Okay, so what we heard from Audrey is the fact that the babies, these infants being premature, have missed what's called the placental transfer, which is occurs during the last trimester of the pregnancy, where the baby grabs from the mother, the placenta, tons of fat and protein to develop their lungs and their neurological system. So having missed that, they have deficiencies and disabilities as discussed. Unfortunately, breast milk is designed for full term, not for preterm. So these poor little preterm babies are born. And of course, breast milk is the best thing that we can give a preterm infant or any infant. In fact, breast milk is unique in the world because it contains oligosaccharides. There's over 200 oligosaccharides discovered. These are sugars that seed the infant gastrointestinal system with good bacteria. Okay, they act as seeds for good bacteria. So they are really boosting the immune system and very important. And they are unique because we have not been able to synthesize these oligosaccharides, human milk oligosaccharides. So, in fact, we have only synthesized one out of the 200 so far. So we need to use human milk or breast milk to feed these little babies. But the breast milk is short in terms of fat and protein, and specifically for brain development in terms of fatty acids, certain fatty acids like ARA and DHA and EPA and RAA. So the brain is not developing if it does not have those fatty acids, as we just heard a few seconds ago. So we need to fortify the human milk, the breast milk.
So how is breast milk fortified to add these vital components at the moment then, Isabel?
So we have some guidelines that we follow in the neonatal intensive care units. These guidelines have been recommendations given by the European Society of Pediatric and Gastroenterology, Hepatology and Nutrition. So these guidelines are great, but they are very difficult to follow because breast milk, human breast milk, varies day to day and week to week, and even with diet from the mother. So to add certain fortifiers, so there exist fortifiers to add to the human milk, we need to measure the actual human milk. And this is where the difficulty comes in, is a fast instrument that can measure the human milk and then add and calculate the necessary fortifications. Now, in a very busy neonatal intensive care unit, typically nurses don't have the time to make those calculations. And those calculations should be done not just based on weight, but also based on risk factors that the baby may have. As for instance, some of these preterm babies, they may have bronchopulmonary dysplasia, which is very common, essentially similar to asthma, and they need more energy to actually do the breathing. So there is, within the guidelines, there is extra guidelines for specific situations.
So it sounds as if the current system is both quite complicated and yet at the same time not particularly sophisticated in that it's not targeting individual needs, individual breast milk composition, individual infant needs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So what is Premi doing that's different then?
Yeah, exactly. The Premi system is really designed to be a personalized feeding system for preterm infants. So we measure the human milk in a few seconds, and we calculate using machine learning and the guidelines the necessary fortification, and we deliver immediate results, such as for this amount of milk, you add this amount of fortifier. And so it makes it very transparent for the nurse to do.
Fantastic. So they take a sample, they drop it into what? Is it like a little slide that they put into a machine, or how does that actually work? How does it manifest itself?
No, they actually measure it. They actually have to measure the fortifier and add it to the milk.
Oh, sure. But how do they detect what's in the breast milk?
Oh, yes. So the Premi system has what it's called the Premi sensor, which is actually a spectrometer that, so they drop literally into the cuvette 2 drops of milk, 0.35 milliliters, so almost no human milk at all, inserted into the sensor, press the button, and 2 to 5 seconds later, they have the results of the composition of the milk in terms of protein, fat, and fatty acids, energy, and carbs.
And the guidelines necessary for them to know what fortification to use.
Once they decide to use that milk, because they may not, they can ask for the calculations. That's correct.
Okay. That's fantastic. That sounds absolutely brilliant. Fantastic. And where are you with this machine? Is it something that you're noticing is being used? Is the uptake there?
Yes, the machine is actually a simple medical device, but the software is not as simple, right? The software does calculations and goes back in line. So actually it can give the neonatologist an idea of what fortification was done and what total feeding was the baby received at a certain date, and map that in terms of the growth of the baby in growth charts. So really, we have a tool that allows the neonatologist to actually understand if there is growth faltering, if the baby is thriving, if it needs to be changed. Okay, so we have done initial clinical trials in Turin, in Italy, in Sant'Anna Hospital. And now we are doing a full-fledged clinical trial in Southampton. And we just started May 1st. It's probably going to take another year, at least, if not 18 months, and involves new certification guidelines that we have to respect now since 2022, and involves not just the medical device certification, but also the software certification.
Right. So basically, you're just in the process of going through the certification, and I guess you're hoping that this will clear and that maybe it will be usable. Any idea when it might be something that we could see on wards?
We're aiming at mid-2025.
Fantastic. Not so far away at all.
Yeah.
Very good. That's very exciting. It's a lot of work. I know that you travel a lot and it's very demanding, and you have the company that you yourself have created, and then plus also this project. What motivated you to get involved in all of this?
Well, the company itself, Tellspec, started by looking at nutrition and looking at what we eat every day and how untransparent the food system is, and how we need as consumers to have some transparency and demand some accountability from the food system. So that's how it started. But the goal was to have a small device to scan the food for the consumer. This is a Google world, right? It would be requiring a Google massive amount of investment, which we didn't get. So we had to focus. And we had an employee that had a sister that had a premature baby. And she was devastated. She was coming in every day to work crying and saying, the baby can't take the food, the baby. So I started looking at it, and I I understood that, the hospital was not even doing any fortification, because sometimes the hospital do standard fortification. Not even a standard fortification was being done. And so I thought, oh my God, the problem here is that they don't know where to start. Even they cannot measure the human milk. So how can they even start by following some guidelines? And I thought, okay, this is a perfect application for a good sensor. And so we developed our second sensor for preemie applications.
Fantastic. Excellent. Excellent work, Isabel. Thank you. That's wonderful. Does anyone have any observations or comments to make to Isabel? Julian, yes, please.
Hey, Isabel, great work. I have a quick question for you. I would assume that the milk composition evolves over time. And if that's the case, any thought of applying the same technology to kind of continue to help the mom when she goes back home, after the premature and the NICU part, to continue to adapt the fortification based on the changing needs?
Yeah, I would hope that that's the case as well, that, eventually the device, because it's very easy to use, stays in the hands of the mother, even if the mother just rents it from the hospital. But we have to do baby steps to get there. Because I think, first of all, the device has to be certified. Second, it has to be proven that, in fact, it helps. Based on the literature, we can reduce, 4% of occurrence of necrotizing enterocolitis and 4% of bronchopulmonary dysplasia, as well as 10% of sepsis. And those are three diseases that these babies really have. But we need much more data in order to have that acknowledged, certified by the doctors, accepted by the doctors. And then maybe in a few years from now, I see, the hospitals having those sensors, and the mother either comes in or the mother takes home as a rental, similar to the breast pumps. I remember when I had my first child, breast pumps were not commercially available, and we would go to the hospital to do that. I mean, that's what I envision. I envision this to happen in a few years from now.
Fantastic.
Great.
Isn't it?
Thank you.
It's fantastic, isn't it? It's wonderful. It's lovely to see all these sort of cutting-edge technologies being put to such practical applications. Talking of which, Julian, cutting-edge technologies, I think we're coming over to you now. The WISH project enabled Bloom Life, the company behind it, to complete the development of a wearable that can help to predict and detect the onset of preterm labor, which sounds just fantastic. So we've been looking a little bit at the impact of preterm birth, and we've been looking at how we can mitigate that with the right nutrition. But how about trying to avoid it altogether? Why premature birth, Julian? There are a lot of areas in which telemedicine and wearables are expanding, but you chose to look at this solution. Why?
Yeah, great question. I think looking at the prenatal period started from my own personal experience. It was actually my wife's first pregnancy, was for me an eye-opener on the technology and data gaps that exist today in maternal and prenatal care. For my personal case, we were lucky that she ended up having a safe and healthy pregnancy, but that wasn't without much anxiety and uncertainty about how the baby is doing and the do's and don'ts around pregnancy, multiple trips to the ER, and thinking that something could be wrong. Then shortly after my own pregnancy, my sister got pregnant, and she ended up delivering twins preterm at 33 weeks. And then my two nephews had to spend several weeks in the NICU. I was very emotionally hard for my sister, for me as well, from a distance. And that's really where I started to get interested into preterm birth and whether there was something that technology could do to help detect that earlier, or detect the risk earlier, and be able to intervene.
Excellent.
If you look at it from a global perspective, my sister's case wasn't unique. There are 15 million babies born preterm every year in the world. 1 million of them will not make it to the age of 5 due to consequences of preterm birth. Preterm birth is the number one killer of children under the years of 5 years old. And that's why I think the innovation that we heard before are great. We're helping to diminish these numbers, but it's still very important to be able to deal with the consequences afterwards.
Okay.
From our perspective, we look at it in terms of technology. We think that better technology will lead to better data. That better data will, in turn, help us reduce the impact and burden of preterm birth. And that's really where the WISH project comes in.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about the current ways of monitoring mother and baby health, and how can they be improved on?
Yeah, well, I got to say that maternal health and women's health in general has long been the land that science forgot. If you look at what doctors use today in terms of technology, it was first introduced in the 70s. It's called the cardiotocogram. It's a machine with belts and a big machine next to the mom. And again, it's been there for close to 55 years now. That means that doctors, OBGYNs, make very important decisions on the health of a pregnant mom and her baby based on very limited data collected during spot checks visit at the clinics. And that is very much the technology and data gap in prenatal health that we're trying to address with the WISH project.
Right. Okay. So what did you guys actually develop then?
So the WISH project was really about developing a wearable sensor that could be used longitudinally during the prenatal period. So it's a patch that is placed on the lower abdomen of a pregnant mom. It measures a bunch of physiological parameters for mom and baby. And the idea is to use a physiological digital biomarker that we developed during the project to detect the onset of labor or preterm labor. And so the idea is that with this patch, the mom can wear it a couple of hours per day. We'll analyze the data based on this biomarker, and then we'll identify a risk of getting into labor. And that risk then can be shared with the mom and especially her doctor. And so if the risk goes too high, then the doctor can be informed about that, and he can take interventions to actually either get the mom in, or if there are contractions already, start with some interventions that are possible clinically.
Okay, so basically that means that the monitoring is done in the comfort of the woman's own home. There is much less stress with regards to not having to go to and from hospital or medical health checkups, et cetera, and it's real time. So this sensor collects data and what? It's automatically transmitted to the cloud where it can be shared with people who have password access or something like that? How does that work?
Yeah, that's right. So the physiological data is collected by the sensor. It's pre-processed on the sensor, and then it's sent indeed in the cloud. In the cloud, we have the AI that runs. That AI will extract this physiological marker from the physiological data, and then, as I said, compute a likelihood of a mom going into labor. That information is then shared with the doctor and the mom, and that basically helps drive possible clinical action.
Right. And I believe actually it can perhaps also measure fetal heart rate, which is obviously, I think, something that would give a woman a lot of reassurance and also the doctor concerned, I guess. Are you finding that?
Yeah, that's some of the work that we've done after the WISH project. The WISH project was really focused on, can we identify early signs of labor onset because of those applications to preterm birth. After that, we continue the development. And once we have the sensor on the lower abdomen, there are many other parameters that we can measure. And one of them is indeed the fetal heart rate. It's kind of it's the other side of the equation, right? So you want to know when the mom is going to get into labor. You also want to know if the baby is okay. And the fetal heart rate tells you that information. And so the idea is that the technology that we have developed allows us to do both. It allows us to have an idea of when the mom is going to get into labor, but also to see if the baby is okay. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. And where are you up to with this? I mean, do you have prototypes? Are you in clinical trials? What's the situation? There might be people listening to this right now thinking, gosh, I want to lay my hands on one of those. What can we tell them?
Well, we're working as hard and as quick as we can to get this to market.
I'm sure.
The WISH project was very important for us because it covered the development of that digital biomarker, but also its validation in prospective clinical trial. And so that trial allows us to show that we were able to detect labor with an equivalent accuracy that the clinical diagnostic of labor, although the mom is home and doesn't need to go to the hospital. So that was very important for us. Now the next step is really for us to continue the validation of the device and the biomarker, get regulatory approval in Europe, CE marking, and then eventually be able to have this technology in the hands of moms and their care team.
Fantastic. That sounds wonderful. Really, really good. And I think you already have FDA, that's the American Association's clearance, and you're going for a CE mark at the moment and for Europe, yes?
Yeah, that's correct. The first FDA clearance to be clear is for actually fetal heart rate. That's the first clearance we got. So we still need to work on our clearance for labor detection. But that's in the pipeline, and we are indeed pursuing the work to get CE marking.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you. This sounds really innovative, Julian. Super. Do we have any comments or questions or observations to make? Yes, Audrey, please.
Yes. When I was listening to you, I was thinking about the fact that some small for gestational age babies, they often show signs that they would have been better off outside of the womb, for instance, because of maternal placental deficiency or things like that. So could you actually use your device to get out babies that are not thriving?
Yeah, it's a great question. We think yes, but of course we still need to do the work to prove that. Fundamentally, what the device does is measure the heart rate of the baby, the heart rate of the mom, and uterine contractility. And these are really the three parameters that help you get a full diagnostic of what's happening during pregnancy about mom and baby. And so with the example of small for gestation age fetuses, at the stage where indeed some placental disorders or complications will start impacting the baby. You will see that by a decreased level of fetal movement, or you can see that by decreased reactivity on the fetal heart rate. These are things that we can indeed measure with the device, and using that, absolutely start giving like early signs or early indications that something may be wrong, right? So that is absolutely where we want to take this. That's the vision of the long term. I think, do you have an example? In the very long term, like fast forward 5-7 years, could we detect early signs of stillbirth, right? That's really pushing this to the extreme. And so the science has to be down there. As I was starting, like there is huge technology gap and data gap in this space. And our first step is to bring the technology that allows us to collect the data. And once we have that data, we can start answering those questions, right? And see, okay, can we see physiological signs for different type of complications, and then try to anticipate that. So it's absolutely part of the roadmap. It's just so much to do in the space that we'll have to start somewhere. But yeah, it's a great question, and it's definitely something we'll like to do in the future.
Exciting times, Julian.
It is.
Exciting times, huh?
It is.
I mean, basically anything you're doing is going to be moving the whole situation forward, rather than taking women regularly into health checks and putting them onto great big monitors where they're, spot checks, as you say. It's a bit passé now, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, guys, thank you very, very much for your time. I think the work is just wonderful, and on all sorts of different levels, and how it all comes together. Clearly, it's an open door into better horizons. This is just really good stuff. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Abigail. It was great to be part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You're very welcome. If you like this podcast, follow us to make sure that the hottest research in EU-funded science isn't passing you by. And if you've enjoyed listening, then why not spread the word? We've talked about insights into how to deal with another pandemic, how augmented reality could save lives in the event of a fire on board ship, and the role of soil bacteria in helping plants thrive. In our last 34 episodes, there'll be something there to tweak your curiosity. Perhaps you want to know what other EU-funded projects are doing to mitigate the impact of premature birth and establish new methods of prevention. The CORDIS website will give you an insight into the results of projects funded by the Horizon 2020 programme and Horizon Europe that are working in this area. The website has articles and interviews that explore the results of research being conducted in a very broad range of domains and subjects, from Plutarch to plutonium. There is something there for you. Maybe you're involved in a project or would like to apply for funding. Take a look at what others are doing in your domain. So come and check out the research that's revealing what makes our world tick. We're always happy to hear from you. Drop us a line. editorial@cordis.europa.eu. Until next time.